That giraffe was real? What? The Last of Us is one of the best video game adaptations ever because most attempts are usually pretty terrible. Resident Evil. So how did they do it? What cinematic techniques help make this show as critically acclaimed as it is? Well, firstly, it's the cinematography. The show uses a variety of different camera styles, but most of the shots with Joel and Ellie are handheld. The cinematographer of episode 1, Senya Sereda, consciously made this decision to give the show a kind of documentary-like grounding versus a bunch of glossy floating Steadicam shots, or tripod shots that lend to a more objective perspective on the scenes. What helped capture these was this pretty nifty piece of gear called the ZG. The ZG is basically a gimbal but without any of the motors on it, meaning you can move the camera around really easily while still keeping that handheld look. Plus the camera op doesn't have to carry a heavy rig on the shoulder for hours on end, meaning that their energy level is going to stay up a lot throughout the duration of the day's shoot. They didn't use this rig all the time, as you can see here with Senya operating the camera on her shoulder during this episode 1 sequence. The ZG is great, but it's not quite the same frenetic handheld look that the traditional shoulder mounted method would give you. For all the camera nerds out there, they shot this entire series with an Alexa Mini paired with Cooke S4 Prime lenses. Mainly because for Senya the DP, the Alexa captures a lot of detail in the background of each shot, so you're not just getting out of focus blobs where you can't make out the environments behind the characters, which was quite an important thing to avoid in order to get the viewer immersed into the series right away. The car journey towards San Marcos is a great example of this, where we're placed right in the back seat, similar to Sarah's perspective as experienced in the video game. This scene also keeps up the handheld documentary aesthetic, switching angles to focus on specific characters while holding for some pretty long unbroken takes. To pull these off and all the choreography that goes into not accidentally running over a crowd of extras that are running all over the streets, the grip team used a pod car which puts the stunt driver on the top of a modified vehicle. These drivers have the real control of the car, while actors inside simply mimic the movements as they happen, meaning they get to focus on their performances while the stunt driver navigates around the location. Quick fun fact, the light that you can see on these actors when the plane hits the ground and explodes everywhere was actually a real lighting cue that was timed to strike and just flood the whole street with this orange explosion glow. The pod car was used across the whole show, in scenes such as Joel and Ellie's Kansas City ambush in episode 4, which is a side note from my research. It doesn't seem like they did the car crash into the store for real in this episode, as you can see from the BTS footage here. But wow, you could have fooled me, the VFX looks so good. The locations in this show are a standout feature for what makes the whole series so engaging. Shot at over 180 locations across Edmonton, Canada, from harsh winter mountain tundras, to huge built from the ground up sets, to modifying existing locales that serve as the backdrop for this post-apocalyptic world. Also, can you believe that the mall in episode 7 was actually a real location? This place was scheduled for demolition, so the production team could pretty much do whatever the hell they wanted with it. It only really had a ground floor, so all of the upper sections that you see within the episode are all recreated in VFX, and the shot of Ellie watching all of the lights turn on within the mall, all of that background is VFX work. It's quite astonishing how many real places the production team were able to either build from scratch or modify to suit the needs of each scene. And it paid off with the actors' performances and the sense of scale that you really get in these physical environments. Probably one of the coolest sequences for a set is the cul-de-sac location, which was built completely from scratch in an empty car park. The production team built 16 to scale houses along with all of the vegetation and road works that you see on screen. The same level of scale is also there in episode 3 for Billstown, where the production team crafted a whole village that was once a town which was destroyed by flooding. It's really a testament to the care these creators have put into scenes so ingrained into the minds of players, and to practically replicate them when in VFX really wouldn't do them justice. Also, let's not forget, this is a HBO show, and with reports that it cost $10 million to make each episode, we'd at least expect some jaw-dropping sequences in there that weren't all filmed within a blue screen studio. Back to the cul-de-sac sequence, it took 4 weeks to shoot this in its entirety, and it was one of the only scenes in the series that was fully storyboarded, mainly due to just the complexity of all of the moving parts that happened within it. Let's check out the lighting for this scene, which included over 400 6-foot bicolor tube lights, rigged over the set spanning 4 huge cranes. These lights replicated a moonlit look for the scene, which motivated how us, the viewers, could even see these characters in a post-apocalyptic world where electricity is quite a rarity. The cinematographer of this episode, Evan Bolter, cleverly chose these tube lights versus the more traditional helium balloon lights, which would be typical to illuminate such a large area like this. As they were shooting all of these scenes at night in Calgary, where in the wintertime the winds can get up to 70 miles an hour, it wasn't the safest option to add these helium balloons flapping around in the sky. What was clever about Evan using the LED tube lights as the moonlight is that once the truck crashes into the house and triggers the explosion, explosion, the tubes could simply get reprogrammed to the fire effect modes, helping to sell all of the on-set practical and post-added VFX fire. Speaking of fire, it's amazing how many times the special effects team utilized real fire as starting points for the VFX artists to later augment. A really great example of this is in episode 8 when Ellie throws a charcoaled log at David, which then causes the cabin to catch alight. The special effects team used real fire piped across the set, which could then be easily reset after each take without any risk of the cabin accidentally burning down. So the show's VFX philosophy in general seems to focus on augmenting practical effects in camera versus rebuilding hundreds of shots from scratch in full CG, which is why even LiDAR scanning to capture the geometry of environments during the production was super helpful to aid the VFX team in their process of editing all of the digital assets on top of the real life locations. The Infected are quite interesting in terms of VFX, because many times real actors were dressed from head to toe in like 5 hours worth of prosthetics work. Like for the cul-de-sac scene, which had 65 real extras on set, including the infamous bloater enemy. Later these were mixed with full CG models to increase the size of the horde. They even did motion capture on set in anticipation of having to ramp all of the amounts of the Infected up. Though the actor cast to play the bloater physically on set was eventually entirely replaced with a full CG model, mainly because the creators wanted to scale up the size of him along with all of his movements and his speed. Something that's probably pretty limiting for a 6'6" guy dressed in a massive prosthetic suit. They shot clean plates of all of the angles that actually had the real bloater within it, in case that they eventually decided to go down this full VFX route. So basically 2 takes of the same shot, one with the physical bloater guy dressed in his bloater suit stood there, and then one without him in it. I do feel a little sorry for the actors having spent so many hours in hair and makeup only to then get replaced by just some nerdy guy on the computer doing his VFX magic. But I'm sure it was still really helpful for the VFX team to have some sort of reference of what a bloater or what an infected person would actually look like within that particular scene. And at the end of the day, it's better to have a monster that looks superhuman and intimidating versus it looking like just a human who is in a costume. It was a similar case with the mycelium tendrils that come out of the infected's mouths. A lot of experimentation for how to do this practically was done by the prosthetics team, but because of the long reset process for all of these tendrils, they opted to just go with the VFX route. Still, it's super impressive what the teams were able to do practically. When I watched many scenes for the first time, I was sure that there were way more VFX elements in there than what was actually done for real. Like Nabu the giraffe, who I was sure was fully made entirely in CG. But turns out this was a very real giraffe that got sourced from Calgary Zoo, with only the backgrounds behind her and Joel and Ellie that were replaced with VFX work. They spent about a month and a half building this blue screen enclosure for the giraffe to become acclimatized to and to get comfortable being around all of these bright film lights. The production designer John Paino said this was probably one of the most complicated pieces of VFX stage scenery and locations he'd worked on, which I find pretty funny considering that this whole show has massive set pieces with fire and water and storms, rivers, snow, sets that took months to build full-scale versions of houses and buildings and trees. Yeah, a giraffe being fed by 2 people was the trickiest part. There's so many more interesting details that went into making this show, which are covered in depth within the Making of the Last of Us episode that's streaming over on HBO now. So I'd highly recommend checking it out if you haven't. I was pretty skeptical when I heard a televised adaptation was happening to this game. Most video game adaptations just don't work that well when the filmmakers try and deviate too far from the characters and narratives that we gamers originally fell in love with.
Well, excuse me, princess.
Leaving the core fan base disappointed, and any potential new fans feeling equally disconnected from a mediocre retelling of the story. But the fact that Neil Druckmann, the original game director, was so heavily involved from start to finish in this show, alongside Craig Mazin's sublime expertise on shows like the Chernobyl miniseries, I was soon convinced by the potential this adaptation could have. And now, it's safe to say that the benchmark has truly been set for what a video game adaptation should look and feel like. It is true what Evan Bolter, the cinematographer, said, that many people, including my own Mama Grasso, will never pick up a controller to experience the story. But in a TV format, the audience expands, allowing them to experience something close to what fans of the original game felt all those years ago. See, Mama, this is why I play video games. Because dads like Joel losing their daughters in the first 10 minutes just makes me sob like a baby. Check out this video if you want to see how Apple filmed their mind-blowing keynote event. And hit that subscribe button if you don't want to remind me that Joel lost his daughter. She wasn't even infected. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.